It was 7:15 in the morning at Dallas-Fort Worth, and Gate C12 smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. Fluorescent lights washed everyone into the same shade. Wheels on carry-ons rattled over the seams in the tile like a heartbeat that never quit. Trent Holloway kept his hand on my elbow as if I might fall apart without him. Not a steadying touch, a steering touch. The kind you use on a shopping cart when you want it to go exactly where you decide. My neck brace rubbed my jaw every time I swallowed. The soft foam looked harmless, almost medical, almost normal. It also hid the fingerprint bruising that was fading too slowly. Eli, my 5-year-old, clutched the straps of his little dinosaur backpack and walked half a step behind my hip, quiet in a way no kid should have to practice. His eyes flicked to Trent's face before they flicked to mine, like he was checking the weather, like he'd learned that storms had patterns. The gate area was packed with people who had places to be, and no reason to notice mine. A couple argued over a phone charger. A businessman tapped his watch and stared at the departure screen. A toddler squealed and then laughed when her mother scooped her up. Overhead, a recorded voice announced boarding groups for a different flight, and every head turned for half a second. Trent wore a polo that looked freshly pressed and a smile that belonged on a brochure. If anyone glanced our way, they'd see a concerned boyfriend or an overhelpful friend escorting a worn-out single mom and her kid. They'd see my brace and the faint cut on my cheek that I'd covered with concealer that didn't quite match. They'd see accident, not trap. I kept my face arranged the way Trent liked it. Small smile, soft eyes, grateful posture. I nodded when he spoke, even when my stomach twisted. I let him handle the boarding passes, let him talk to the gate agent, let him stand between me and the moving river of strangers. My phone was gone. My ID was safe in his bag. Eli's birth certificate was for paperwork. Every sentence sounded responsible until you listened to what it took away. Have you ever felt trapped in a place full of people? Like the crowd was a wall instead of a shield? That was me, standing under a gate sign that promised travel, while my body screamed that I wasn't going anywhere that mattered. Eli shifted from foot to foot. I could tell he needed the bathroom because he always pressed his knees together when he did, but he didn't ask. And he'd learned not to. He only leaned closer to my side, and I tried to brush my fingers over his hair like it was a normal morning, like I wasn't counting exits. That's when I noticed the man sitting alone 2 rows over, angled away from the TVs like he didn't need them. Dark jacket, no watch, no loud phone call. He looked like another traveler until you watched the way his attention moved. Not wandering, cataloging. He tracked the crowd without staring, the way a lifeguard watches water. His name wasn't written anywhere, of course. I didn't know it then. I only knew the feeling in my skin when his eyes landed on Trent's hand around my elbow and didn't slide away. I knew the tiny pause in his breathing, the subtle narrowing of focus. Like he'd seen this shape of control before and recognized it. Trent tugged my elbow, guiding me toward the line forming near the stanchions. His fingers tightened just enough to remind me who decided how fast I walked. Eli hurried to keep up, backpack bouncing. Trent's voice stayed gentle, like he was narrating a family trip. I kept nodding, kept performing, because the performance was the only thing keeping the consequences waiting. We passed a coffee kiosk where the espresso machine hissed like steam from a vent. A woman in a red sweater laughed at something on her phone. A man in a cowboy's cap grumbled about weather in New York. Life kept happening right beside me, loud and careless. The watchful man stood as if he'd decided to stretch his legs, and for a second our paths lined up. He didn't step in front of Trent. He didn't ask questions. He simply existed in my peripheral vision like a door that might open if I could reach it. I had learned the silent signal in a late-night scroll through videos when Eli finally slept and my heart wouldn't. A simple motion meant for moments when words were too dangerous. I practiced it in the bathroom mirror until my hand could do it without my face changing. It felt ridiculous. It also felt like the last thread between me and the world. As I drew even with him, I lifted my hand for less than a breath. Palm toward me, fingers folding down, thumb tucked, then my fist closing, like I was catching something small. It was nothing to anyone watching. It was everything to someone who knew. I kept walking. My pulse roared in my ears. Trent didn't notice because he was busy scanning the line, annoyed that other people existed. Eli stumbled, and a crumpled paper slipped from his jacket pocket. It skidded under a row of seats and stopped near the man's shoe. On it was a crooked stick figure drawing, me and Eli holding hands, and beside it, in shaky block letters, one word: help. At 7:43, our boarding group was called. Trent tugged me forward, impatient, owning the pace. I didn't look back, but I felt Damian move, like a shadow choosing a direction, close enough to matter, far enough to stay invisible tonight. Hope flared and scared me. I stepped onto the jet bridge, knowing the cabin door would lock behind us. The jet bridge felt longer than it had a minute ago, like the plane was stretching time on purpose. Trent kept his hand on my elbow, guiding me past seat numbers like he owned the aisle. Eli's dinosaur backpack bumped my hip, and I steadied him with 2 fingers, light as a warning. The plane smelled like pretzels and perfume and something metallic. When we reached our row, Trent slid into the aisle seat first, blocking me from stepping out again. He tucked Eli by the window, then motioned me into the middle. The cabin door thudded shut behind us for good. He lifted my small duffel into the overhead bin with a carefulness meant for an audience, then asked the flight attendant for water and a napkin, as if my neck brace might require special handling. I nodded and smiled the way I had practiced in mirrors, because smiling makes strangers relax. Trent wiped an invisible smudge from Eli's cheek, then adjusted Eli's seatbelt himself, tightening it 1 notch too far. Eli didn't complain. He just stared at the seatback pocket and breathed shallow, and Trent's knee pressed against mine, a quiet reminder that my space belonged to him, until we landed. At 8:25 in the morning, engines roared and my stomach dropped as the runway blurred. Eli's fingers curled around mine, and I pretended my hand was steady so he could borrow that steadiness. I watched the seatbelt sign as if it was a jail light. My rules were simple. Do not argue in public. Do not make Eli cry. Do not run unless you can run forever. Trent leaned close and murmured something about being proud of how calm I was, then patted my thigh like praise. I stared ahead and let the anger burn behind my ribs. The drink cart arrived and the ice clinked in plastic cups. Trent spoke before I could even inhale. He ordered for me in that polite voice that sounds helpful, the one that makes you look unreasonable if you object. He handed Eli a packet of crackers, then kept the rest of the snacks on his tray, rationing them like rewards. Eli ate slowly, eyes down, waiting for permission to reach again. I wanted to ask the flight attendant for help, but Trent had already staged us. Injured girlfriend, anxious child, devoted caretaker. I swallowed my words with the cabin air. 3 months earlier, I had posted in a local moms group that I needed a room, just until my paycheck hit. Trent answered fast. He offered a spare bed, groceries, and a ride to preschool, and he sounded like the kind of man churches brag about. When I moved in, the rules began softly. No visitors, no late walks, no friends who asked questions. Then came the warnings about child services, about unstable women, about how easy it was for paperwork to appear. His kindness was a leash, and it tightened when I tried to reclaim my phone, choices, my voice. On the dark window I caught a stitched reflection, my pale face, Trent's shoulder, Eli's knees, and farther back the man from Gate C12. Damian sat angled toward the aisle, so still he looked carved. He wasn't staring, yet I felt his attention like heat you can't ignore. When the plane tilted, the reflection slid, and his eyes briefly met mine. No smile, no pity, just awareness, like he had recognized the signal and saved it for later. My pulse jumped. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and forced my breathing slow until my shoulders unclenched. Eli shifted again, and I knew his bladder was winning. Trent noticed and made him wait, pretending to check the seatbelt sign, pretending he cared about rules. He liked being the one who decided relief. Minutes dragged. Finally, he stood and leaned into the aisle to speak with a flight attendant, smiling his practiced smile. At 8:54, I was alone for the first time since Gate C12, but my body didn't believe it. Trent was still close, still listening, still shaping the story. I reached back to rub Eli's hand and promised him we would make it through today. A few rows up, Damian unbuckled and walked toward the restroom with quiet confidence. He paused beside our row as if checking the overhead bin, and that pause felt chosen. His gaze flicked to my brace, then to Trent's hand on my arm, then back to my eyes. It lasted a heartbeat, but it stripped my disguise. He didn't nod or frown. He simply looked at my signaling hand and moved on. I kept my face neutral because Trent watched everything. Still, hope sparked inside me, bright and dangerous, and I wondered if he had a plan or instinct and patience. Trent sat back down and resumed the role of gentle guardian, but his fingers drummed once on the armrest, a sign he sensed a shift. He checked on Eli in that syrupy tone that always carried a warning for me. Eli nodded too fast. My jaw clenched behind the brace. My mind ran through worst cases. The stranger's glance meaning trouble. Trent saving his anger for later. Trent demanding I apologize for attracting attention. I kept my breathing even, stared at the safety card, and counted beats until my pulse stopped betraying me. Somewhere behind us, Damian moved again, quietly. The plane leveled off and the hum became a steady pressure behind my eyes. People opened laptops, sipped soda, and acted like this was ordinary. For me, it was a locked room with wings. I watched Trent's profile, and the pleasant face that knew how to threaten without raising his voice. I watched Eli's lashes droop, exhaustion buying him a few quiet minutes. And I watched Damian in the window reflection, a presence that stayed. I could not ask him for help. I could only keep my mask on long enough for him to decide what kind of man he was. By 9:40 in the morning, the cabin had settled into that sleepy cruise rhythm, but my body refused to believe it. The engines hummed like a warning I could not turn off. Trent's knee stayed pressed to mine, a soft claim disguised as comfort, and Eli sat curled by the window pretending the clouds were interesting. I watched the aisle the way I used to watch my rearview mirror, waiting for something to lunge. The air smelled of reheated cinnamon and sanitizer. People laughed quietly, and it made me feel lonelier. Even the seatbelt sign looked like a lock. Trent kept performing for the strangers around us, tilting his voice into that gentle register that sounded like care. He adjusted my neck brace once more than necessary, then tucked my hair behind my ear as if I were his responsibility. When the flight attendant passed, he answered questions for me with a practiced smile, then handed me my water like a reward. Eli reached for the crackers again, and Trent tapped the packet shut, waiting until Eli asked with his eyes. I memorized every tiny move, because later he would ask what I did wrong and I embarrassed him. I hadn't met Trent through romance or chance. I met him through desperation, through a night post I almost deleted, asking if anyone had a spare couch for a week. My rent was overdue. My paycheck was thin. And Eli's daycare bill was a cliff. Trent replied within minutes, offering a room, groceries, and a ride to work. He called it helping a mother get back on her feet. The first week felt like rescue. The second felt like rules. And the third felt like debt I could never repay. I learned to say thank you while my stomach twisted. On paper, he was a saint. He paid a bill here and there, bought Eli new shoes, told neighbors I was recovering from a breakup. In private, he explained how fragile my custody looked if anyone asked too many questions. He kept pamphlets about family court in the kitchen drawer like weapons. and he joked about checks the way other men joked about sports. If I protested, he said he worried about my mental health, about my stress, about my tendency to panic. I started swallowing anger the way you swallow turbulence, are braced and silent, waiting for it to pass. Damian Cross stayed in my periphery like a shadow that belonged there. I saw him when the cabin lights dimmed, reflected in the dark glass, and I felt the uncomfortable certainty of being noticed. He didn't fidget, didn't scroll, didn't act bored. His stillness felt trained, like someone who had learned to watch rooms for danger instead of entertainment. Sometimes he stood and moved down the aisle with quiet purpose, and people made space without realizing why. That was the moment I understood a frightening thought. Trent controlled my life, but Damian could change it with a single decision today. At 10:05, my patience cracked in a place no one could see. Eli's head drooped against the window, and Trent used that softness to tighten his grip, pinching my wrist under the armrest like a private correction. He leaned toward the flight attendant again, laughing, making sure everyone heard how lucky I was to have him. My throat burned with the urge to say the truth, but truth is useless when it costs your child. Have you ever felt hope show up at the worst time, like a door opening in a room you were trained to accept? When Damian returned from the restroom, he slowed beside our row as if checking the overhead bin. His fingers touched the seat back, casual, but his eyes held mine for one steady beat. In that beat, I felt him acknowledge my signal without words, like a secret shared in plain sight. He flicked his gaze to Eli, then to Trent's hand, then back to me, and I understood he had mapped the danger. As he walked away, he pocketed his boarding pass with quiet finality, at the way someone does before making a choice. My chest lifted, fear rushed in behind it. I kept my face smooth, because Trent watched expressions the way gamblers watch cards. He asked me something about my comfort, loud enough for passengers, and I nodded like a grateful woman. Inside, my mind was racing. If Damian acted too soon, Trent would punish me later in ways that left no witnesses. If Damian did nothing, we would disappear into whatever story Trent had built for us on the ground. I hated that my future hinged on a stranger's reading of my hand. Still, the worst part was the temptation to believe I mattered to someone outside this row. The captain's voice drifted through the speakers about our descent, and Trent straightened like the announcement belonged to him. He gathered our trash, checked Eli's belt. It then placed his palm over my knee, anchoring me in place. I could tell he was watching for any change in my obedience, any sign I had connected with another human being. My skin felt too tight under the brace. Across the aisle, Damian sat with his hands folded, eyes forward, but the tension around him sharpened, like a spring. I knew he was waiting for wheels to touch down, when decisions became irreversible. When the seatbelt sign chimed back on, Damian met my eyes, not with comfort but with certainty. He raised his phone once, screen dark, then tucked it away like a vow. No smile, no questions, no permission asked. His calm said everything. He had seen me, and he would not disappear after landing. My heart lurched, because hope is what Trent punishes hardest. I squeezed Eli's hand and fixed my face into calm again. I waited for the wheels to hit the runway, knowing the real chase would begin the moment the aisle opened and Trent realized I was changing. At 11:20 in the morning, the wheels hit the runway and the cabin erupted in tiny movements, latches clicking, shoulders lifting, people already halfway gone in their minds. My stomach rose into my throat, not from landing but from what came next. Trent's palm stayed heavy on my knee until the plane slowed, like he was waiting for the exact second the rules changed. Eli's fingers were slick in mine. I kept breathing through the brace, tasting metal and recycled air, telling myself this was not freedom, only a door opening into another room where he could lock it. The moment the seatbelt sign chimed off, Trent stood first and turned our row into a checkpoint. He pulled Eli's backpack down, unchecked the zipper, then positioned himself in the aisle so I had to wait for him to move. He smiled at strangers, nodding as if we were a little family traveling for something sweet. His fingers closed around my elbow again, steering me into the stream of bodies. I kept my eyes soft and my voice small, because any hint of urgency would make him suspicious, and suspicion was always punished later. Even steps had to look casual. On the jet bridge, the air shifted colder, smelling of rubber and damp steel. Eli asked with his eyes to stop, but Trent tightened his grip and kept us moving, passing flight attendants and laughing couples. The terminal swallowed us in bright noise. Announcements, suitcase wheels, the beep of carts. Trent chose where we stood at every pause, placing Eli between the wall and my hip, placing himself between us and everyone else. I memorized exits I couldn't use. I watched the security cameras and reminded myself that cameras record nothing if you never look distressed. That was his trick. I saw Damian only in pieces, like a story told through glass. A silhouette behind an ad screen. A dark jacket reflected in the polished floor beside a spill warning sign. A face briefly doubled in the window of a closed kiosk. He never closed the distance, but he didn't vanish either. Each time I caught him, my pulse jumped, then steadied, as if my body knew help was possible even while my mind didn't dare believe it. Trent glanced over his shoulder once, scanning for threats, and I swallowed my fear so it wouldn't show. Eli stayed quiet too. By 11:58 we were at baggage claim, on a bright carousel surrounded by bored travelers and tired kids. Trent chose a spot with my back to the crowd, then stood behind me as if shielding me from bumping strangers. It felt like a cage made of manners. One suitcase circled again and again, black and plain, the only thing Trent bothered to check. He lifted it when it came, heavy enough to make his arm tense, and that heaviness scared me more than the bag itself. Eli's head drooped, and Trent ignored it, pushing forward. I followed, counting every breath. Outside, curbside air hit sharp, smelling of exhaust and winter sun. People shouted into phones, drivers honked, and every curb looked identical in the rush. Trent took my arm harder, directing me toward taxis instead of rideshare, as if he didn't trust apps that left a trail. Eli squinted, rubbing his eyes, and I felt guilt stab me because he should have been in school, not surviving. Trent kept his body between us and anyone who lingered too close, and he spoke in that warm tone that made me sound dramatic in my own head. I kept smiling and nodding. The taxi's vinyl seats stuck to the backs of my legs. Trent slid in first, guiding Eli to the far side, then placed me between them again. The driver asked something about our destination, and Trent answered without hesitation, as if he'd rehearsed the address. We pulled into traffic, joining a stream of yellow and black, and for a few minutes the city looked ordinary. Storefronts, traffic lights, pedestrians with coffee. My heart tried to believe ordinary meant safe. I watched side mirrors, wondering if Damian had found a car, wondering if he was still a shadow behind us somewhere. But Trent kept his hand on my thigh, casual, and every time I shifted he pressed down like a paperweight. He entertained Eli with landmarks, making the city sound like a treat, while my brain tracked gas stations and police signs I couldn't reach. I stroked Eli's hair and hummed low, trying to lend him calm. The glass showed my tired eyes, and then, briefly, a pair of headlights that seemed to hold behind the taxi through 2 turns. Maybe it was Damian. Maybe it was nothing. Living in maybe is its own kind of prison today. Just when my shoulders started to loosen, Trent leaned forward and spoke to the driver again, his tone sharpening under politeness. The taxi skipped the next busy exit and slid toward quieter streets, away from billboards and crowds. My skin went cold beneath the brace. The buildings thinned, the sidewalks emptied, and the light turned flat. Eli shifted and pressed his knees together, whispering with his body that he needed a bathroom. Trent didn't look back. He only patted Eli's leg once, as if comfort was permission. I stared at the mirror, searching for headlights, praying Damian was still there. The taxi rolled past a grocery store with a cracked sign and into blocks where porch lights blinked like tired eyes. Trent watched my face in the mirror, hunting for panic, and I kept my expression soft so he would stay calm. Eli slumped against me, thirsty and worn out, and my guilt burned hot. The road narrowed, trees closing in, and the driver slowed. Trent gave directions without looking at me. We turned onto a street with no pedestrians and no shops, only yards and peeling paint. My heart understood first. The next cage would have a front door. At 12:34 in the afternoon, the taxi rolled to a stop on a street that looked sleepy and harmless, the kind with cracked sidewalks and mailboxes leaning like tired shoulders. Trent paid without looking at me. He stepped out first, grabbed the single suitcase, and opened my door with the same practiced gentleness he used in airports. Eli blinked in the sun, rubbing his eyes. I followed, neck brace itching, and watched Trent scan the houses like he was checking mirrors. The rental sat narrow and gray, curtains already drawn. A small porch light was on, even in daylight. Inside, stale air hit me first, a mix of old carpet, dust, and something sweet trying to cover mildew. Trent shut the door and turned two locks with quiet clicks that sounded too final. He kept his body between me and the peephole, and then pulled the curtains tighter, as if the outside world might reach in. The living room held a sagging couch, a wobbly table, and a TV with no remote. Eli's sneakers squeaked on the bare wood, and he froze until Trent nodded. I pretended it was normal. My smile felt pasted on, but it kept Eli breathing. Trent carried the suitcase to a back bedroom, returning with a bright voice that filled the empty rooms. He pointed out a tiny bathroom, a kitchen with chipped tiles, and a second bedroom for Eli, as if giving a tour to guests. He set out peanut butter sandwiches on paper towels, then poured juice into plastic cups he found in a cabinet. Every move said home. Every move also said I decide. He reminded me to keep my brace on, to rest, to be grateful for quiet. I watched Eli chew and wondered what he was learning from us today. My rules tightened around me like the brace. Keep Eli calm, keep Trent pleased, keep my face neutral. I noted the front door chain, the back window latch, the hallway leading to the bedrooms, but I didn't stare too long. Staring would look like planning. Planning would look like defiance. Trent liked gratitude, so I gave him gratitude with my mouth while my mind counted seconds. Eli asked with his eyes for the bathroom, and I guided him gently, making it feel like a choice. When he returned, Trent praised our good manners. I swallowed rage and kept shoulders loose. Afternoon drifted into a gray quiet. Trent turned on a small lamp, though sunlight still leaked at the edges, and the house felt staged, like a set waiting for actors. I heard a car slow outside, then roll on without stopping, then slow again 10 minutes later, and the same engine note maybe, or my fear-making patterns. A shadow slid across the curtain and disappeared. Trent never looked up. He chopped lettuce for dinner with steady hands, humming, while my nerves kept listening. I told myself not to hope, but hope kept peeking through cracks like a child testing doors. Trent announced dinner time as if we were a real household with habits that mattered. He served pasta from a pot, then wiped Eli's mouth a little too hard, smiling like patience. He asked me to sit straight, to keep my brace aligned, and his fingers lingered at the back of my neck where the foam met skin. Eli watched that touch and went still. I forced myself to talk about cartoons and school, normal topics, because normal topics were armor. Trent laughed at the right moments. Later, he insisted Eli brush his teeth while he timed it to perfection. When Trent moved a chair, its legs scraped the floor with a sound that made my stomach clench. That scrape reminded me of the first night in his apartment when I tried to pack a bag, and he calmly put my clothes back in the drawer, explaining consequences. He never shouted, He just described what could happen if I made things difficult. Lost daycare, missed work, a call to someone official. He made fear look reasonable. Now, in this rental, he used the same calm voice, the same movements, as if control was organization. I kept breathing and smiled anyway. As evening came, the street quieted, and that quiet felt like it was listening back. I noticed a dark car parked half a block away, engine off, sitting longer than a neighbor's stop should last. Curtains on the opposite house twitched, then fell still. It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. I kept my gaze on Eli's toy cars, rolling them across the coffee table, pretending play. Trent watched me watch nothing, and his eyes sharpened. I lowered my head, kissed Eli's hair, and acted grateful for the calm. Heart whispered Damian, but my mouth stayed quiet. When Trent finally went into the kitchen, the air in the living room loosened by a fraction. I heard cabinet doors, running water, the clink of a pot, and I used the sound as cover to lean close to Eli. He looked up like he had been waiting. From his backpack pocket he pulled a small key ring, one silver key and a plastic tag, and pressed it into my palm. He had taken it when Trent set the suitcase down. My chest cracked open with pride and terror, and I hid the key under my brace strap and kept smiling hard. By 7:10 in the evening, the windows were black mirrors, reflecting only our small lamp and the shapes we tried to be. Trent returned from the kitchen with a plate for me, then stood too close while I ate, watching for any change in my eyes. His calm felt thinner now, like a glass that could crack if tapped. Eli yawned and leaned against my side, and I held him like a shield. Outside, a car door closed somewhere on the street, then silence settled again, heavier than before. Trent paused, head tilted, listening. I froze by the door. At 7:45 at night, the doorbell rang once, clean and bright, and the whole house stopped breathing. Trent froze mid-step, plate in hand, listening like a hunter. Eli's head lifted from my shoulder, eyes wide, body turning to stone. The lamp hummed. The curtains barely moved. I felt the hidden key under my brace strap like a hot coal. Trent's smile vanished, replaced by a thin line that promised consequences. He walked to the door slowly, as if speed would admit fear, and I followed with my heart banging. Somewhere outside, footsteps scraped the porch, then went quiet. Before Trent unlatched it, he pressed 2 fingers to my arm, a silent order to stay sweet. He called out in a polite tone, pretending surprise. A man answered calmly, voice low, like he belonged there. Locks turned and cold air spilled in. Damian stood on the porch with no jacket collar raised, hands visible, posture easy. The porch light cut his face into angles, and I knew him from reflections and that impossible glance on the plane. Trent's expression tried to reset into charm, but his eyes flashed alarm when he recognized Damian. My stomach tightened, my spine straightened. Damian stepped inside without rushing, and the living room seemed to shrink around him. He didn't look at the TV or the couch. He looked at Trent's hand hovering near my elbow, then at Eli's small face. He spoke as if stating facts, not asking permission, and Trent answered with careful laughter. I could tell Trent was choosing words that sounded responsible. He said I was overwhelmed, that he was helping, that I needed rest. I watched Eli's jaw clench, and I kept my own face blank because Eli copies my fear. Damian's eyes softened once, then hardened again immediately. Trent shifted to block the hallway, still smiling at Damian like this was a misunderstanding. Under that smile, his voice sharpened, and I recognized the version that came out when he felt exposed. He mentioned police, paperwork, and how strangers could twist stories. Damian didn't flinch. He let silence hang until it made Trent talk faster, and that silence felt heavier than shouting. My mind ran through choices the way it always did. If I panicked, Trent would claim I was unstable. If I stayed too calm, he would accuse me of plotting. I stayed quiet and held Eli's hand. Damian's gaze flicked to the staircase, then back to me, and his tone felt like a seatbelt clicking into place. He made it clear that Eli needed distance from this room. Trent protested with syrupy concern, acting wounded that anyone questioned him. I nodded once, not at Trent, but at protection. I lifted Eli carefully, murmuring reassurance into his hair without making a scene, and carried him upstairs. Each step creaked like betrayal. Eli clung to my brace strap, shaking, and I forced my breathing slow so he could borrow it. In the bedroom, I found the lock, turned it. At 8:12, I sat on the floor with my back against the door, Eli pressed into my side. The room smelled like old detergent and cardboard. I told myself to stay steady, because kids don't remember exact words. They remember the temperature of your voice. Downstairs, footsteps shifted, then stopped, then shifted again. A long silence stretched, broken by Trent's laugh that sounded too sharp. Damian's voice stayed low and even, making Trent's louder responses sound desperate. I covered Eli's ears with my palms without making it a game. My heart beat in my throat, counting seconds between creaks. From behind the door, I caught fragments, and not sentences, just the shape of power-changing hands. Trent paced, and the floorboards complained under his weight. He kept returning to the same weapon: concern, legality, the idea that I was fragile and confused. Damian answered with details that no stranger should know, and each detail landed like a stone in Trent's gut. I pictured Damian noticing bruise beneath my brace, the way Eli watched for permission, the way Trent held my elbow. None of that was proof in court, but it was proof in a room. Trent's breath turned rough below. Eventually, the voices lowered, and I heard a drawer open, the clink of a key ring. Damian's steps moved toward the hall, and his calm stayed unbroken. He called for me softly, not like an order, more like a signal that the air was safer. I opened the door a crack and guided Eli behind me, and then left him in the room and went down the stairs. Trent stood by the table, face pale, my ID and Eli's birth certificate in his hands. Damian held my phone between fingers, returning stolen property. My knees threatened to fold, but I kept standing. Then Trent, cornered, tried one last trick. He lifted a printed report from the folder, stamped with letterhead and a date from last week, describing my supposed panic episodes and unsafe parenting. My name was spelled right. Eli's name was there too. The words were cold, official, believable to anyone who didn't know the theater behind them. Trent's eyes glittered with victory, as if paper could chain me more than locks. Damian read it without blinking, but I saw his jaw tighten. My stomach dropped. Escaping tonight would not matter if the system believed this story tomorrow and took Eli. Damian didn't fight Trent's paper the way I expected. He treated it like a problem, not a verdict. His calm words made Trent's confidence wobble. Trent kept staring at me, promising payback with his eyes. I went upstairs for Eli, lifted him, and pressed my cheek to his hair so he could feel me steady. He looked at the locked door, then at my face, asking silently if we were leaving. I nodded. When I stepped back into the hall, the house felt smaller. Downstairs, the front door opened, air rushed in, and I understood rescue was only a hearing. At 9:55 at night, the front door opened and cold air washed over my face like water. I carried Eli down the steps while my knees tried to buckle, and the street looked empty but not safe. A dark SUV waited with its engine purring low. A woman named Jordan Reed stood beside it, calm as a porch light, one hand out to guide me in. Damian stayed a few yards back, speaking in short, clipped directions I felt more than heard. Trent's house behind us glowed dull like a wound that refused to close for the rest inside. Jordan opened the rear door and tucked a blanket around Eli before he could even ask. The leather seat smelled clean, unfamiliar, and my body rejected comfort the way it rejects spoiled food. The moment the door shut, my lungs tightened, expecting another lock, another rule. The SUV rolled away, and I watched the rear window for headlights that followed too steadily. Jordan kept her voice gentle, describing turns and time like it was a lullaby, while Damian's car slipped behind us at a distance. I told myself not to hope, then hated myself for trying again in the dark. My hands shook in my lap, not from cold, but from the sudden release of holding myself together. I kept touching the edge of my neck brace as if it could anchor me. In my pocket, Damian had returned my phone, and the weight of it felt unreal, like a limb grown back overnight. Yet the report Trent waved around kept flashing in my mind, official letters and neat lines that could swallow a mother whole. I imagined a judge reading it and deciding Eli deserved someone steadier. The thought made nausea climb my throat. Safety now had paperwork, too. At 11:40, we arrived at a low building set back from the road, lights warm but not bright, like the place had learned not to announce itself. Jordan keyed us through a gate, then another door, each click softer than Trent's locks, but still loud in my nerves. A receptionist looked up with kindness that didn't demand anything from me. The hallway smelled of laundry detergent and chamomile. Eli's head sagged against my shoulder, and Jordan guided us to a small room with clean sheets and a nightlight on. My body kept waiting for a price, but none came. Jordan handed me forms on a clipboard, and my stomach clenched the same way it does near a courthouse. Names, dates, emergency contacts, questions about safety. I wrote carefully, forcing my handwriting to look steady, because I had learned how much adults trust neat letters. A staff member offered water and spoke softly, explaining that everything was confidential and that help did not mean taking Eli away. I nodded, but fear is stubborn. Eye cameras in the corner made me flinch until Jordan pointed out they watched hallways, not families. Even kindness felt like a test tonight, and I hated that. Eli got cocoa in a paper cup and a tiny stuffed bear from a basket by the nurse's desk. He held both like treasure, then yawned so hard his whole face wrinkled. In the room, I helped him change into borrowed pajamas, careful with buttons because my hands still trembled. I tucked the blanket to his chin and watched his eyelids fall, slow and trusting, the way they used to before Trent. The nightlight painted his cheeks gold. For the first time in hours, he slept without listening for footsteps. I sat in the chair and let my shoulders drop. That drop was followed by shaking so intense my teeth clicked. I pressed my palms together, trying to stop it, but my body didn't care about pride. Relief flooded in, then guilt right after, because I had brought Eli into danger by being broke, by believing a stranger's help, by staying too long once it turned wrong. I stared at the clean walls and felt the strange grief of safety, how it makes you mourn the version of yourself who could once relax. Outside the window, the parking lot was empty. My mind kept filling it with Trent's car anyway. Later, Jordan returned with a folder and a careful expression that told me the next steps were complicated. She explained that the report Trent created could be challenged, but it would take time, documentation, and consistency. For now, she said we should not go back to my old address, and we should not use my old phone number for everyday calls. She described a confidentiality plan, a safe mailing address, and temporary contact information, all designed to keep Trent from locating us through paperwork. I understood the logic, and still it felt like disappearing, like I had to erase myself. Damian did not come into my room. He spoke with Jordan in the hallway, low and controlled, and then paused at my doorway so I could see he was still there. He kept distance the way a dangerous man tries to become safe. Staff moved around him with quiet respect. I noticed small details. He watched exits without looking jumpy. He never hovered over Eli. And he waited before stepping closer. His attention never wandered. That steadiness made me wary and grateful at once. I wondered what life taught him to read danger, and why he chose to notice me. I lay on the bed listening to Eli's breathing, and the building's quiet felt too loud. My phone sat on the nightstand, but I didn't know who to call. Jordan's folder rested beside it, full of survival plans. Keep records, stay consistent, let advocates speak, never answer Trent directly. I hated that my motherhood could be argued over by strangers with stamps. Still, we were alive, and that mattered. In the hallway, Damian's footsteps faded. I closed my eyes and braced for tomorrow, because the fight had moved from locks to letters, and I refused to lose my son twice. By 2:10 in the afternoon, the safe building had turned into an office. Clipboards appeared, phones vibrated, printers hummed. Eli colored at a small table with a cup of apple slices, and I tried to smile like paperwork was normal. Jordan sat beside me, steady and patient, translating every form into plain choices. What to record, what to save, what not to answer. My hands still shook when I signed my name. The bruise under my brace itched. I kept thinking safety would feel like rest, but it felt like work I could not afford to do wrong again. Trent's retaliation arrived in neat envelopes and polite emails. A school office called to confirm my address, then asked careful questions about Eli's guardianship. An unknown number left a voicemail describing concern for a stressed mother and a frightened child. My stomach flipped because the words sounded reasonable, the way poison can taste sweet. Jordan logged every contact and reminded me to breathe before reacting. She called it narrative warfare, not because it was dramatic, but because it was strategic. Trent was building a paper version of me that could win in court before anyone ever looked at my face. The nonprofit team moved like people who had done this before. A lawyer named Marisol reviewed the report Trent waved in my living room, pointing out where it overreached, where dates did not match, where language sounded copied. A counselor asked me to describe events without guessing or apologizing. I learned how often I softened my own story to survive. They photographed my injuries with my consent, documented Eli's routine, and requested records the right way. Still, every form felt like a trap door. I kept seeing a judge's face, imagining how quickly motherhood could be questioned by strangers today. Damian stayed mostly in the background, but his influence touched everything. A new phone arrived for Jordan's office with secure settings already configured. A hotel across town was booked for Marisol when she had to meet someone in person. When the facility needed an extra night nurse, one appeared without fuss. No one announced where help came from, yet everyone seemed unsurprised by his reach. That reach frightened me. It also steadied me, because Trent's reach had always been used to shrink my world. Damian used his to widen it, then stepped back, leaving space for my choices at last. Eli kept asking, in that kid way that cuts through you, whether we were going home. I told him we were going safer, and my throat tightened because I did not know what home meant anymore. On intake forms, I circled boxes about anxiety and sleep, and I hated myself for needing paperwork to prove I was human. I watched my son stack blocks with a volunteer, laughing once, then checking the door. RN rage rose behind my eyes. Trent had taught him vigilance. I wanted Damian to be wrong about noticing us, but I needed him right this time. At 6:30 in the evening, Jordan asked if I felt strong enough to meet Damian in the lounge. The room smelled of tea and linen. He stood by a window, not close, hands loose, eyes tired. He shared his story without drama, like confession was a duty. Years ago, a woman named Sophie Lane worked near one of his businesses. He noticed bruises and smiles and accepted her insistence that she was fine, because getting involved felt messy. Weeks later, she died. He told me he has carried that silence since, and he refused to repeat it with me. I sat with my palms flat on my knees, feeling my anger shift shape. Part of me wanted to hate him for having the kind of power that could have saved Sophie. The kind of power my life never touched. Another part of me recognized restraint as its own language. He did not ask for gratitude or closeness. He simply looked ashamed of the moment he chose convenience. I realized he had recognized my signal because he had been haunted into learning it. That knowledge did not make him safe, but it made his choice tonight feel real, not impulsive. Afterward, Marisol showed me screenshots pulled from Trent's laptop and messages saved by the nonprofit's tech team. The language was familiar, the same polished concern, the same talk about rescuing women who needed structure. There were forums full of men trading advice on finding single moms, isolating them, rewriting their reputations, and using custody threats like handcuffs. Trent had a username and friends. My skin crawled as I read the posts. Because I saw my own life reduced to a checklist. It was not just him. It was a system that hid behind smiles and paperwork, and it was running. That night, I watched Eli sleep and thought about the women behind those forum posts, the ones who never got a door unlocked. I wanted to vanish into quiet and never be noticed again. Silence felt protective. Silence also felt like permission for predators to keep working. Jordan asked whether I would give a statement later, so my case could support others. My stomach clenched. Speaking up could pull attention to us, and attention had teeth. Staying quiet could leave another mother cornered by the same script. I did not have an answer, but I felt the question changing me. Damian left the lounge first, giving me space. I watched him go and wondered what kind of life teaches a man to look for silent signals. Marisol scheduled steps, Jordan set reminders, and a counselor helped Eli name feelings instead of hiding them. My future had checklists that were mine, not Trent's. Still, the forums haunted me. If I rebuilt quietly, I might stay safer. If I spoke, I might help break the pattern. I stared at my phone, then at my sleeping child, and decided I would rebuild anyway. The only question was whether I would use my voice. At 7:05 in the morning, Vermont light slid through our cheap blinds and painted stripes on the kitchen table. I brewed coffee that smelled like safety, poured cereal, and lined Eli's shoes by the door the way he liked. My hands still checked the deadbolt twice before I let myself breathe. The apartment was small, but it was mine. Signed with my own name, paid with my own paycheck. Eli hummed while he ate, and I watched his shoulders, grateful they no longer sat up by his ears. Outside, gulls cried over river, and I did not flinch. 3 months ago I could not imagine routine, but now Tuesdays had a rhythm. I walked Eli to the elementary school 2 blocks away, kissed his forehead, and watched him run toward the line without scanning for danger first. After drop-off, I worked the morning shift at a little bookstore on Main Street, shelving paperbacks and ringing up tourists. Jordan called once a week to check my safety plan, and Marisol emailed updates whenever court deadlines moved. Therapy happened every Thursday, and I kept showing up, even when my stomach begged me to hide because Eli deserved a mom. Healing was not a straight road. A siren outside the store still made my shoulders jump, and I still chose seats that faced doors. At night, I set my keys on the same hook, then checked windows, then checked again, annoyed at myself and unable to stop. Shame visited in small waves, usually when I watched other parents chatting easily at pickup. I reminded myself that survival did not mean weakness. The custody report Trent wrote did not disappear, but our lawyer pushed back, and the story stopped chasing us every hour. Some nights I cried, then woke Eli smiling. On Saturdays, the town library let us use a small meeting room that smelled like carpet shampoo and old books. A few moms came, some with toddlers on their hips, some alone with tired eyes. I did not tell my whole story. I simply showed them the hand signal I once flashed at Gate C12. And I explained why silent tools matter when your voice is unsafe. We practiced gently, like learning a new alphabet. Then we talked about boundaries, safe contacts, and noticing each other in grocery aisles and parking lots. Their hands steadied, and mine finally did too. At 9:10 one quiet morning, after Eli left for school, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a blank card. I did not know how to thank Damian without making him a hero in my head. So I wrote what was true. I had a lease in my own name. I earned my own money. Eli slept through the night more often. I made choices without asking permission. I told him I was alive, not just surviving, and that he did not fail this time. He saved someone. I prayed accepted words, then let me go. And I mailed the card through Jordan's office because I still guarded my address like it was skin. Part of me expected a reply. Another part of me feared one. Damian had never asked for contact, never tried to slip into our life like a claim. That restraint mattered. It gave me room to heal without performing gratitude every day. Still, when the mailbox clanged shut, my stomach fluttered. I wondered if he kept the card in a drawer, or if he burned it to keep distance. Either way, I felt lighter for saying it aloud, and for choosing my ending. 2 weeks later, my old card died in the grocery parking lot, steam rising like a bad joke. I called Jordan, embarrassed, and she told me not to panic. That afternoon, the shop owner said a payment had been made toward the repair through a community fund. The receipt listed no name, and only a reference number and a note about supporting families in transition. A day after that, the nonprofit emailed about a new scholarship pool for children, enough to cover school supplies and winter coats. I stared at the message, thinking of Damian's quiet reach again without asking back. Being helped from a distance was strangely hard. It felt safer than Trent's closeness, yet it still reminded me someone could track my life. I sat with that discomfort in therapy and named it. I wanted freedom, not another watcher. Then I remembered the difference. Trent watched to control. Damian watched to protect, then stepped away. I could dislike the feeling and still accept the intention. On a windy evening, I walked Eli along the river path, and when a stranger passed too near, I held my head high instead of shrinking. That was my progress. I'm small but real today. Jordan mentioned a regional training in Boston for advocates, and she asked if I would attend as a survivor voice later in the year. The idea of crowds made my throat tighten, yet part of me wanted to stand in daylight and not apologize for existing. Eli was growing, legs longer, questions sharper. He asked why we practiced signals at the library, and I told him it was like learning to swim before you see water. Some afternoons I caught myself scanning faces at the coffee shop, noticing elbows, tension, forced smiles. I wondered how many stories beside me unseen. That is the strange gift Damian left me. Attention with purpose. I could not save everyone, but I could notice, and noticing felt like a promise to my son. Some nights, before bed, I practiced the signal once in the mirror, then laughed at myself for still doing it. Yet I knew why. One day in a crowded place, someone might flash that quiet plea, and I would have to choose what kind of person I was. If that moment comes, I will not look away. I will act carefully, and then keep walking. Will you notice when it matters? At 3:30 in the afternoon, the Boston waterfront market smelled like salt, fried dough, and sunscreen. Eli, 7 now, walked beside me with a paper map and the loose confidence of a kid who believes crowds are for fun. I held my keys in my fist out of habit, but my shoulders stayed low, not braced. Street musicians played near the pier, and tourists queued for lobster rolls. I came for a training event with Jordan's network, yet my mind kept cataloging exits the way it always does, softly, without panic. Today, I wanted to be present, not hiding. I saw him before my brain admitted it. Damian Cross stood near a vendor tent, hands in his pockets, watching the water more than the people. 2 years had changed me more than him. He still looked like quiet authority wearing a plain jacket. My first reflex was to check for Trent, even though Trent was a memory with paperwork scars. My second reflex was to breathe. Damian's gaze found mine, steady and unintrusive, as if he were giving me the choice to approach or vanish. Eli tugged my sleeve, asking for lemonade, and I nodded, grounded in the moment. We met between the lobster roll line and a rack of souvenir hoodies, close enough to hear each other over gulls. I noticed how I no longer shrank when a man stepped into my space. I simply stood, feet planted. Damian asked after Eli with a softness that never crossed into ownership, and I answered with the kind of honesty I once guarded. He listened like he had all the time in the world, yet his attention stayed sharp, scanning without making a show. The gratitude in my chest felt heavy, not romantic, real, like debt repaid by living well. I remembered Gate C12 the way you remember a storm once you are dry. Back then I held my keys like a weapon. Now they dangled from a bright lanyard Eli picked out. Back then my breath stayed trapped behind my teeth. Now I could inhale all the way to my ribs. Damian seemed to notice the difference without congratulating himself. He spoke carefully about choices and consequences, and I sensed the discipline it took him to stay respectful, to let my life belong to me. For a second, the market noise faded, leaving only the tide and my heartbeat. That was when I saw her. A woman in a gray sweatshirt stood near the information booth, one hand on a stroller handle, the other hovering at her chest. A man beside her smiled too widely and kept directing her steps with a palm at her back. The woman's eyes flicked to the floor, then to the crowd, and then she did it. The small, fast hand motion I teach in library rooms. My skin went cold. I looked at Damian, and he followed my gaze immediately, reading the same pattern without needing explanation. I kept my face calm, always. I guided Eli to stand closer to the pretzel cart, pretending we were deciding flavors, and I signaled Jordan's training badge on my lanyard to a nearby market staffer. My voice stayed even as I asked for help, the same way you ask for a lost child, urgent but controlled. The staffer nodded and moved toward the booth, calling for a supervisor and security without making a scene. Damian stepped back, giving space, yet his posture shifted into readiness, watching angles and people like he had done on that plane. I kept my hand on Eli's shoulder and breathed slowly. The man beside the stroller noticed movement and tried to steer her away, but the supervisor arrived first, asking routine questions that forced him to pause. Another staff member offered the woman a seat inside the booth area, and she took it with a nod. I could not hear their words, only the change in energy when other eyes stayed on them. Eli watched quietly, and I told him with my body that everything was okay. Damian stayed at my side, not touching me, just present, like a wall against wind. My heart pounded, yet I did not freeze today. After the woman disappeared into the office with a counselor, Damian and I stepped closer to the railing and watched the harbor boats glide by. I felt the old ache for the girl I was at Gate C12, and I felt pride for the mother I had become. Damian's expression held something like relief, but he did not act like he owned the outcome. He simply acknowledged that noticing matters, that ordinary places can hide emergencies. I realized my life had become proof that help can be respectful. Eli smiled nearby, unaware how hard I chose calm and kept breathing. Damian did not linger after the staff took control. He gave Jordan's badge a brief look, as if approving the fact that community systems exist, then stepped back into the crowd. I watched him move through people the way smoke moves, present and gone without disturbance. For a moment I wanted to chase him and explain how his choice reshaped my life, but I knew he already understood. The best thanks was standing upright beside my son. Eli tugged my hand, ready for the aquarium exhibit, and I let the day continue, carrying both gratitude and distance like balanced weights. By 5:10, The waterfront had shifted into golden hour, and the breeze off the harbor felt like a clean page. I walked Eli toward the subway entrance, fingers linked, and I thought about the woman at the booth and the girl I used to be. Attention is not magic, but it is a start. When someone notices, the story can change direction. I hope you carry that with you after this video ends. If this hit your heart, like it, share it, and comment one small way you look out for others. We all belong to each other, daily.